Have you ever had that moment when everything you believed about your life suddenly shatters? For Nora Whitman, it began with a nightmare. Her grandmother reaching out with ash-covered hands, whispering, "Don't let them take what's ours." But when she discovers a mysterious bank account number hidden inside her grandmother's urn of ashes, Nora realizes the nightmare was just the beginning. Her ex-husband and his new girlfriend, a cunning attorney, have already stolen her $4 million inheritance through elaborate legal manipulation. Now, as Nora follows the trail of her grandmother's hidden account, she uncovers family photographs that shouldn't exist, receives threatening messages warning her to stop searching, and stumbles upon a web of decades-old secrets involving disappearances, hidden identities, and blood money. With each revelation, the danger grows closer. Someone is willing to kill to keep these secrets buried, just as they have before. This isn't just a story about stolen money. It's about the devastating truth of who Nora really is and the shocking reality of the family that created her. Follow along as we unravel this heart-wrenching tale of betrayal, identity, and the lengths some will go to bury the past. If you're watching this, make sure to follow our channel, hit like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because once you start this story, I promise you won't be able to stop until you know the truth. The ticking of the grandfather clock pierced the silence as it struck 3:17 a.m. Nora Whitman's eyes flew open, her nightgown drenched in cold sweat. The dream again. Grandma Eleanor reaching out with ash-covered hands, her voice a desperate whisper. "Don't let them take what's ours." But tonight was different. Tonight, her grandmother's eyes held something more than just the ghostly presence that had haunted Nora since the funeral. They looked alive, urgent, as if Eleanor herself was trying to break through the veil between life and death. "Jesus Christ," Nora muttered, her heart racing as she swung her legs over the edge of the bed. The wooden floor creaked beneath her bare feet, another reminder of how far she had fallen. 3 months ago, she'd been living in her family's historic colonial in Charleston. Now, she was in this damp rental in Kansas City, where the walls seemed to weep with the same grief that consumed her. The moonlight cast long shadows as Nora padded across the living room, drawn to the gold metal urn sitting atop the mantelpiece. It looked so small, so insignificant. How could it possibly contain all that remained of Eleanor Whitman, the woman who had raised her, loved her, protected her, the only person who had ever truly seen her? "I'm sorry," Nora whispered, her fingers brushing the cold metal. "I failed you." The urn was the last vestige of dignity Nora had managed to keep when her world imploded. 3 months earlier, her ex-husband Ethan and his new girlfriend, a sharp-faced attorney named Olivia Barnes, had orchestrated the most elaborate betrayal imaginable. Through a series of forged documents, backdated contracts, and legal maneuvers that made Nora's head spin, they had managed to steal the $4 million inheritance Eleanor had left behind. Money meant for the elderly care facility that had cared for Eleanor in her final days. Money meant for Nora's future. Money that represented a lifetime of memories, gone. Evaporated into offshore accounts before Nora even realized what was happening. She had fought, of course, hired lawyers she couldn't afford, pleaded with judges who looked down from their benches with cold indifference. Insufficient evidence, they said, as if her shattered life wasn't evidence enough. Nora stared at her reflection in the darkened window. At 41, she looked 60. Grey strands had infiltrated her once auburn hair. Deep lines framed eyes that had cried enough tears to fill the Missouri River. Something in the dream tugged at her memory. "Don't let them take what's ours. Not yours. Ours." As if Eleanor was still fighting alongside her. Without thinking, Nora reached for the urn. She had never opened it since receiving it from the crematorium. It felt wrong, sacrilegious somehow. But tonight, her hands moved of their own accord, twisting the sealed lid with surprising strength. The soft hiss of breaking the seal echoed in the quiet room as the lid came free. The scent of ash drifted upward, earthy, final. Nora felt her throat close with emotion, but as she tilted the urn slightly, something fluttered to the carpet. Something that wasn't ash at all, A small folded paper yellowed with age and dusted with grey residue. Her hands trembled violently as she bent to retrieve it. Who would put paper in a cremation urn? The thought was absurd, impossible, yet the evidence lay in her palm, undeniable. With shaking fingers, Nora unfolded the note, careful not to tear the fragile paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor's elegant, old-fashioned script. Account number 0483972, First Chicago Bank. For the day you need it most, my darling. Grandma Eleanor. Nora's breath caught. The room seemed to spin around her as she read the words again and again, trying to make sense of them. Why would her grandmother hide an account number inside her own urn? What could it possibly mean? Her mind raced back to the court proceedings. The statements from Ethan's lawyers claiming Eleanor's assets had been consolidated years ago. The doctored financial records. The judge's dismissive tone when he told Nora there simply wasn't enough evidence to pursue the case further. "Holy shit," she whispered, clutching the paper to her chest. For the first time since Eleanor's death, Nora felt something stir within her that wasn't grief or despair. It wasn't exactly hope. It was too sharp, too dangerous for that. It was something closer to fear, mixed with a fierce determination that made her heart pound. She glanced at the grandfather clock. 3:42 a.m. Too early to call anyone, too late to go back to sleep. Instead, she took the paper to the kitchen table and copied the account number onto 3 separate pieces of paper, hiding one in her wallet, another in her Bible, and taping the third beneath a drawer in her desk. As dawn broke over Kansas City, casting a pale glow through the shabby curtains, Nora made a pot of coffee and stared at the original note, still dusted with her grandmother's ashes. A strange calm had settled over her, replacing the chaotic grief of the past 3 months. "What are you trying to tell me, Grandma?" she whispered, running her finger over Eleanor's handwriting. The answer seemed to float in the air around her, as tangible as the ash that still clung to her fingertips. "The truth, my darling. I'm trying to tell you the truth." For the first time since the funeral, Nora allowed herself a small, brittle smile. She didn't know what she would find when she went to Chicago to investigate this mysterious account. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Ethan and Olivia had no idea what was coming. They had taken everything from her. Now she was about to return the favor. The drive to Chicago stretched before Nora like a metaphor for her life, long, uncertain, with no guarantee of anything worthwhile at the end. She had barely slept after finding the note, her mind racing with possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. By dawn, she had packed a small overnight bag, tucked Eleanor's note safely inside her grandmother's prayer book, and pulled her 2012 Honda Civic out of the driveway before her neighbors had even turned on their coffee makers. The 4-hour drive gave her too much time to think. The radio remained off. Nora couldn't bear the cheerfulness of morning DJs or the romance of love songs. Instead, she rehearsed what she would say when she reached the bank, scenarios playing through her head like film reels. "I'm Eleanor Whitman's granddaughter," she practiced aloud, her voice sounding strange in the empty car. "I recently found this account number." But how would she explain discovering it in an urn of ashes? Would they laugh her out of the building? Call security? The prairie landscape of Kansas gave way to the industrial outskirts of Illinois and finally to the looming skyline of Chicago. Nora hadn't been here since a family trip when she was 16. Eleanor had shown her the Art Institute, Navy Pier, and the majestic buildings along Michigan Avenue. "This city has secrets in every cornerstone," her grandmother had told her, eyes twinkling with what Nora had taken for simple nostalgia. Now she wondered if there had been more to those words. The First Chicago Bank still existed, though its original headquarters had been absorbed into a larger financial complex downtown. The old logo remained, however, a stylized eagle within a shield, now mounted on sleek glass doors, rather than the marble entryway Nora vaguely remembered from childhood. She parked in an overpriced garage, checked her appearance in the rearview mirror and winced. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her complexion had the sallow look of someone who had forgotten that sunlight existed. She applied a quick coat of lipstick, a futile gesture that did nothing to disguise her exhaustion, and smoothed her wrinkled blazer. The bank lobby hummed with midday activity. Young professionals in sharp suits, elderly customers moving slowly between velvet ropes, tellers efficiently processing transactions behind bulletproof glass. Nora approached the information desk, prayer book clutched to her chest like a shield. "I need to speak with someone about an old account," she said, trying to keep her voice from trembling. The receptionist, a young woman whose name tag read Alyssa, smiled with practiced efficiency. "Do you have an account number or statement?" Nora hesitated, then carefully opened the prayer book and removed Eleanor's note, now protected in a plastic sleeve. "I have this. It's my grandmother's account. She passed away recently." Alyssa's expression softened slightly as she examined the paper. "I'm sorry for your loss, Ma'am. This account number format is quite old. Let me get Mr. Reeves, our senior manager. He handles our legacy accounts." 5 minutes later, Nora sat in a leather chair across from Terence Reeves, a balding man with kind eyes and a bow tie that seemed at odds with the modern decor of his glass-walled office. "Mrs. Whitman," he began, studying the note through half-moon glasses. "Ms.," Nora corrected automatically. The divorce had been finalized 8 months before Eleanor's death, one trauma piled atop another. "Ms. Whitman," Reeves amended with a nod. "This account is very old. It was opened in 1972, which explains the format. We migrated to a new system in the late 90s. He squinted at his computer screen. "And I'm seeing something unusual here. The account has been flagged with an archived investigation notice." Nora's heart sank. "Investigation? What does that mean?" "I'm not entirely sure. Let me check our physical records." Reeves stood, straightening his bow tie. "Some of our oldest accounts still maintain paper files in our basement archive. Would you mind waiting while I look into this?" Nora nodded, fighting to keep her expression neutral even as her pulse quickened. Investigation. The word echoed in her mind, raising new questions. What had Eleanor been involved in? Was this why she had hidden the account number in such a macabre location, to ensure it would only be found after her death? Left alone in the office, Nora studied her reflection in the polished surface of Reeves's desk. She barely recognized herself. When had the fine lines around her eyes deepened into permanent creases? When had strands of grey begun to infiltrate her auburn hair? In the 3 months since Eleanor's death, and the 6 since Ethan's betrayal, Nora had aged a decade. Reeves returned 20 minutes later, carrying a sealed manila folder stamped with Whitman Eleanor May across the front. His expression had shifted from professional courtesy to something more guarded, more complex. "I found the file," he said, setting it on the desk between them. "This account has been dormant since 1983, Ms. Whitman, but it was never closed." He opened the folder, revealing yellowed bank statements, carbon copies of old checks, and what appeared to be handwritten notes from bank officers long since retired. Nora leaned forward, scanning the documents. What caught her eye wasn't the balance or the transaction history, but the signature on the account opening forms. It wasn't Eleanor's flowing script. The signature was angular, aggressive, nothing like her grandmother's elegant handwriting. "That's not my grandmother's signature," she said, looking up at Reeves in confusion. The manager nodded slowly. "Yes, I noticed that as well. The account was opened by Eleanor Whitman, but the signature authorization form bears a different signature entirely, which raises several compliance questions." He hesitated. However, there was one more item in the archive. From the bottom of the folder, Reeves withdrew a sealed envelope yellowed with age. On the front, in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Nora, when I am gone." This was attached to the account file with explicit instructions that it only be given to Nora Whitman in the event of Eleanor Whitman's death. "We would need to verify your identity before releasing it, of course." Nora's hands trembled as she placed her driver's license on the desk. "I'm Nora." Eleanor was my grandmother. After checking her ID and matching it against the name on the envelope, Reeves carefully handed it to her. "Whatever this contains, Ms. Whitman, it seems your grandmother went to great lengths to ensure you would receive it." The envelope felt impossibly heavy in Nora's hands. She broke the seal carefully, the paper crackling with age. Inside was a single sheet of Eleanor's personal stationery, cream-colored paper with a small rose embossed in the corner. The letter was handwritten, the ink faded to a soft sepia. There are truths that time buries to protect love. If you are reading this, the past has come back to find you. Nora felt her legs go weak beneath her, grateful she was already sitting. The cryptic message continued. The account holds what I could not bring myself to destroy. Not money, evidence. When you understand what it means, you will know what must be done. But be careful, my darling. Some ghosts should remain at rest. The letter was signed simply Eleanor, without the usual love grandma that had adorned every birthday card and Christmas note throughout Nora's life. Ms. Whitman, are you all right? Reeves's voice seemed to come from far away. Nora looked up, disoriented. I'm sorry, yes, this is just unexpected. She carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. What's the status of this account now? Is there money in it? Reeves consulted his computer again. The original deposits were substantial for the time, approximately $250,000 in 1972 dollars, with interest over 50 years. He adjusted his glasses. The current balance would be just over $4.2 million. The exact amount Ethan and Olivia had stolen from her. The room seemed to tilt around Nora. This couldn't be coincidence. Somehow, this forgotten account held exactly the sum that had been taken from her. But Eleanor's letter mentioned evidence, not money. Evidence of what? I'd like to access this account, Nora said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Reeves frowned. I'm afraid that's complicated, given the investigation flag and the signature discrepancy. We would need to verify your legal right to the funds. There would be paperwork, possibly probate court involvement. How long would that take? Nora interrupted, suddenly desperate. The answer to everything, Eleanor's secrets, the stolen inheritance, perhaps even Ethan and Olivia's betrayal, seemed tantalizingly close. Weeks, possibly months. Reeves's expression was apologetic. But I can provide copies of the statements for your records, and of course the letter was explicitly meant for you. As Nora left the bank an hour later, clutching a folder of photocopied documents and Eleanor's mysterious letter, she felt both exhilarated and terrified. Whatever secrets lay buried in her family's past, they were worth $4.2 million, and someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep them hidden. In the parking garage, she sat in her car for a long moment, staring at Eleanor's cryptic words. The past has come back to find you, not the other way around. As if Nora wasn't the one doing the seeking, but the one being hunted. She started the engine with renewed determination. Whatever ghosts Eleanor had warned about, they were already awake. And Nora was going to make damn sure they haunted the right people. Sleep eluded Nora for the third straight night. The digital clock on her nightstand cast a harsh red glow across her bedroom. 2:38 a.m. She had read Eleanor's letter so many times that the words were imprinted on her consciousness. There are truths that time buries to protect love. What truths? What love? The questions circled her mind like vultures. Giving up on sleep, Nora padded to her cramped kitchen and brewed a cup of chamomile tea, though she doubted it would calm her racing thoughts. Rain tapped against the windows of her rental house, a gentle percussion that only heightened her sense of isolation. The bank statements from Eleanor's mysterious account lay spread across her kitchen table, illuminated by a single overhead light. They told a strange story. The account had been opened in 1972 with a deposit of $250,000, an enormous sum for that era. Then nothing. No withdrawals, no additional deposits, just interest accumulating silently for decades, like a secret growing in the dark. Nora traced her finger over a notation on one of the statements, pursuant to agreement dated July 17, 1972, no withdrawals without dual authorization. What agreement, and whose authorization besides Eleanor's would have been required? Her laptop hummed quietly as she scrolled through social media for what felt like the 100th time that week. Ethan and Olivia's profiles had become a twisted form of self-torture that Nora couldn't resist. Their latest post showed them at Aspen's most exclusive ski resort. Olivia, blonde and perfectly composed, even in ski gear, raising a champagne flute toward the camera. Ethan, his arm around her waist, sporting the easy smile that had once made Nora's heart flutter. The caption read, "Living our best life. Re-blessed Rue's new beginnings." Rage surged through Nora so violently that she nearly slammed her laptop closed. That was her money they were spending. Her inheritance, her future that they were toasting with $200 glasses of champagne. Her phone buzzed with a text message startling her. Who would be texting at nearly 3 a.m.? The number was unfamiliar. Stop digging. Some graves should stay closed. Nora's blood went cold. She dropped the phone as if it had burned her fingers. The text had arrived precisely 3 days after her visit to the bank. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was watching her. For a wild moment, she considered calling the police. But what would she tell them? That she had received a vague, threatening text after investigating a bank account her grandmother had hidden in an urn of ashes. They would dismiss her as paranoid, or worse, delusional. Instead, she took a screenshot of the message and forwarded it to her email, then deleted the text from her phone. Evidence. Eleanor had mentioned evidence in her letter. Now Nora was collecting her own. Sleep was impossible after that. As dawn's grey light filtered through her windows, Nora made a decision. If she wanted answers, she would have to look deeper into Eleanor's past, not just the financial records, but the woman herself. The morning found her at the public library, poring over microfiche records of local newspapers from the 1940s and 50s. Eleanor had rarely spoken about her childhood, except to mention that she had grown up in an orphanage outside Chicago after losing her parents in a car accident. It wasn't much, but it was somewhere to start. The orphanage had been called St. Catherine's Home for Girls, operated by Catholic nuns from 1920 to 1968, when it was demolished to make way for suburban expansion. Photographs showed a severe Victorian building with narrow windows and an imposing iron gate. The thought of Eleanor growing up in such a forbidding place made Nora's heart ache. After 3 hours of searching, Nora found only 2 references to the orphanage during the years Eleanor would have been there. One was a charity announcement for a Christmas pageant. The other was a brief notice about a teenager who had run away and was being sought by local authorities. Neither mentioned Eleanor. On an impulse, Nora drove to St. Mary's Catholic Church, which had overseen St. Catherine's during its operation. The church was a beautiful Gothic structure, its stained glass windows glowing with rich blues and reds, even on this overcast day. Inside, the scent of incense hung in the air, and the silence felt heavy with centuries of prayers. "Can I help you?" The voice belonged to an elderly nun who had emerged from a side door, her wrinkled face kind beneath her traditional habit. "I'm researching St. Catherine's Home for Girls," Nora explained. "My grandmother lived there in the 1940s. Something flickered in the nun's eyes, recognition or perhaps caution. "St. Catherine's has been gone a long time," she said, her voice softening. "But I may be able to help. I served there as a young novitiate before taking my final vows. What was your grandmother's name?" "Eleanor Whitman, Eleanor May Whitman." The old woman's expression shifted, her smile fading slightly. "Eleanor. Yes, I remember her. Blonde hair. Quiet girl. Always with a book." She gestured for Nora to follow her to a pew where they both sat. "She arrived when she was 8 or 9, if I recall correctly." "Yes, after her parents died in an accident," Nora confirmed. The nun's gaze sharpened. "Is that what she told you?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications Nora couldn't quite grasp. "Yes. Wasn't that true?" Sister Agnes, as she introduced herself, folded her hands in her lap, the rosary beads wrapped around her fingers clicking softly. "Eleanor and Margaret came to us in 1940. Their parents hadn't died in an accident. They had abandoned the girls, left them on our doorstep with nothing but a note saying they couldn't care for them any longer." Nora felt as if the floor had tilted beneath her. "Margaret? Who's Margaret?" "Eleanor's sister." Sister Agnes looked surprised. Identical twins they were, inseparable for years. "You didn't know about Margaret?" The world seemed to blur around the edges as Nora struggled to process this revelation. No, Eleanor never mentioned having a sister. Never. Sister Agnes's face clouded with what looked like genuine sorrow. Oh, my dear. I assumed, well, I shouldn't be surprised. After what happened, Eleanor refused to speak Margaret's name again. What happened? Nora's voice had dropped to a whisper, as if they were discussing secrets the church walls shouldn't hear. The elderly nun hesitated, fingering her rosary beads. Margaret disappeared when they were 17, just vanished one night. The police searched, but... She shook her head. They never found a body. A chill ran through Nora that had nothing to do with the church's cool interior. You're saying she was murdered? No one knows for certain, but there were rumors. Sister Agnes lowered her voice. Margaret had been seeing someone, a man much older than her, a soldier back from the war. Eleanor was beside herself with worry. She told me once that the man was dangerous, that Margaret didn't understand what she was getting involved in. The pieces were starting to connect in Nora's mind. The hidden bank account, the cryptic letter, the money that matched her inheritance exactly. This man, do you remember his name? Sister Agnes closed her eyes, thinking. It's been over 70 years, my dear, but I believe his last name was Whitman. Yes, that's right. Eleanor took his name later, which always struck me as odd given the circumstances. Nora felt as if she'd been struck. Eleanor had married her sister's boyfriend, the man who might have been responsible for Margaret's disappearance. Did the police ever suspect him in Margaret's disappearance? Sister Agnes's expression turned grim. They questioned him, certainly, but he had connections, wealthy family, political ties. The investigations stalled. And then, a few months later, he and Eleanor were married. She shook her head. Many of us found it disturbing. But Eleanor had changed after Margaret vanished. She was different, harder, more determined. And the man, Whitman. What was his first name? Nora asked, her mouth dry. Harold, Sister Agnes replied. Harold Whitman. He'd served in Europe during the war, came back with medals and money. She paused. And secrets, I always thought. Men who fought in that war saw terrible things. Did terrible things sometimes. Harold Whitman. The name hit Nora like a physical blow. Eleanor had always claimed that Nora's grandfather had died before she was born, that she had never known him, another lie in what was becoming a tapestry of deception. Thank you, sister, Nora said, rising on unsteady legs. You've given me a lot to think about. Sister Agnes caught her hand. Be careful with the past, child. Sometimes the truth doesn't set us free. Sometimes it just opens doors better left closed. The same warning Eleanor had given in her letter. Be careful. Some ghosts should remain at rest. But it was too late for caution now. As Nora drove home through the gathering dusk, her mind raced with implications. Eleanor had taken the name of the man who might have been responsible for her twin sister's disappearance. Had she loved him? Feared him? Or was there something else, something calculated in her decision? Back in her rented house, Nora created a timeline on her kitchen wall, using sticky notes and string to connect the fragments she had discovered. 1940, Eleanor and Margaret abandoned at St. Catherine's. 1957, Margaret disappears at age 17. Months later, Eleanor marries Harold Whitman. 1972, Eleanor opens a mysterious bank account with $250,000. What had happened in the intervening years, and how did it all connect to the money Ethan and Olivia had stolen from her? As Nora stared at her makeshift investigation board, her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Last warning. The debt of blood has been paid. Let it rest. A debt of blood. Eleanor's letter had mentioned evidence, not money. What if the $4? $2 million wasn't an inheritance at all, but blood money. Payment for something terrible that had happened in 1957. What if her entire life had been built on a foundation of secrets and lies? The abandoned Whitman family home stood like a sentinel at the end of a winding driveway. Its Victorian architecture, a stark contrast to the modern suburban homes that had sprung up around it over the decades. Nora had inherited this property from Eleanor, but had never been able to bring herself to sell it or move back in after her divorce. Too many memories lingered in its shadowy corners and creaking floorboards. Today, however, she found herself drawn back to the place where Eleanor had raised her, searching for answers that seemed to recede further into darkness with each revelation. The key stuck slightly in the lock, rusty from disuse. The door swung open with a mournful groan, releasing the stale air of abandonment. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that penetrated the heavy curtains. Everything remained exactly as it had been the day Eleanor was moved to the nursing home. The antique furniture draped in white sheets, the grandfather clock frozen at 3:17, family photos arranged meticulously on the mantelpiece. Nora moved through the rooms like a ghost herself, touching objects that had once been part of her daily life. The china cabinet where Eleanor had displayed her prized porcelain collection, the reading chair where she had told Nora bedtime stories, the roll-top desk where she had written her letters every Sunday afternoon without fail. Letters. The thought triggered something in Nora's memory. Eleanor had kept decades of correspondence in leather-bound albums, meticulously organized by year. If there was evidence of Margaret, of Harold Whitman, of whatever dark secret lay in the family's past, it might be hidden among those fading pages. The attic stairs protested under Nora's weight as she climbed toward the small dormer window that cast a pale rectangle of light onto the dusty floorboards. The heat was stifling, the air thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten things. Cardboard boxes were stacked in neat rows, each labeled in Eleanor's precise handwriting. Christmas decorations, summer clothes, Henry's schoolbooks. Henry, Nora's father, another ghost in this house of secrets. He had died when Nora was just 6, a sudden heart attack that Eleanor had always attributed to the family's weak heart gene. Now Nora wondered if that too had been a lie. At the far end of the attic, beneath the sloping eaves, stood an ancient trunk bound with leather straps. No label adorned this container. The brass lock that had once secured it hung broken, as if someone had forced it open long ago. Nora knelt beside it, her heart racing with anticipation and dread. Inside, she found what she was looking for, and more than she had bargained for. Albums, yes, but also loose photographs, newspaper clippings, and a small jewelry box containing a tarnished silver locket. Nora opened the albums with trembling hands, dust tickling her nose as she turned the brittle pages. The first album contained photographs from the 1940s and 50s, Eleanor as a child and teenager, her blonde hair and serious expression instantly recognizable. But in nearly every image there was another girl, identical in appearance yet somehow different in essence. Where Eleanor's posture was rigid, this girl's was relaxed. Where Eleanor's smile was restrained, this girl's was wide and uninhibited. Margaret. It had to be. A photograph from what appeared to be their 16th birthday showed the twins in identical dresses, arms linked, standing before a cake with 16 candles. On the back, someone had written, Eleanor and Margaret, June 1956. Nora stared at the image, trying to reconcile this tangible evidence with Eleanor's lifelong silence about her sister. How could someone erase a twin from their narrative so completely? What kind of pain or guilt would drive such thorough erasure? As she continued through the album, Nora noticed that the photograph stopped abruptly in early 1957. There were no more images of Margaret. Instead, the next several pages contained newspaper clippings about a missing teenager, headlines yellowed with age. Search continues for missing girl, and twin still missing after 3 weeks. Toward the end of the album, Nora found a single photograph that made her breath catch. Eleanor and Margaret, holding hands and standing in front of what looked like a summer cottage. They were wearing identical sundresses, their blonde hair glowing in the sunshine. On the back, a simple inscription, Summer of 1945, Margaret and me. But as Nora examined the photograph more closely, she noticed something she had initially overlooked. In the background, partially obscured by shadows, stood a man in military uniform. His face wasn't clearly visible, but his posture conveyed watchfulness, as if he were observing the girls rather than posing with them. Nora pulled out her phone and used its camera to magnify the image. The man's features remained indistinct, but there was something unsettling about his presence, a darkness that seemed to hover around him like an aura. Was this Harold Whitman, the man Eleanor had later married, despite his possible connection to Margaret's disappearance? The man whose name she had taken, whose blood might run in Nora's veins? The sound of a car door slamming outside jolted Nora from her thoughts. She moved quickly to the dormer window, peering down at the driveway below. A black sedan had parked behind her Honda, but no one emerged from the vehicle. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. Nora's pulse quickened. Was it the same person who had sent the threatening texts? How had they known she would be at the old house today? Gathering the photograph album and the silver locket, Nora descended from the attic as quietly as possible. Through the lace curtains of the living room window, she could see that the black sedan remained in the driveway, its engine still running. She slipped out through the back door, cutting across the overgrown garden and through a gap in the hedge that she had used as an escape route during her rebellious teenage years. The neighboring property was vacant, the house under renovation. Nora hurried across its weed-choked lawn, her heart hammering against her ribs. Only when she had circled back to the main road and called an Uber did she feel safe enough to examine her findings more carefully. The photograph with the mysterious figure in the background seemed to burn in her pocket, its significance growing with each passing minute. Back in her rented house, Nora uploaded the photo to her laptop and enhanced it using a basic editing program. The man's features became slightly clearer, a strong jaw, hooded eyes, a mouth set in what might have been a smile or a grimace. Not enough to make a positive identification, but enough to haunt her dreams. As night fell, Nora sat at her kitchen table surrounded by the fragments of Eleanor's past. The silver locket lay open beside her laptop, revealing a tiny photograph of two identical baby girls inside, Eleanor and Margaret at perhaps 6 months old, impossible to tell apart. A knock at the front door startled her from her reverie. Nora froze, listening. No one knew she was here except the Uber driver who had dropped her off hours ago. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Moving silently to the window, Nora peered through a gap in the curtains. No one was visible on her front porch, but a manila envelope lay on the welcome mat. After waiting several minutes to ensure whoever had delivered it was gone, Nora retrieved the envelope, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the doorknob. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph, a copy of the exact same image she had found in Eleanor's album just hours before. The twins in their sundresses, the shadowy figure lurking in the background. But this copy had been altered. Someone had circled the man in red ink and written across the bottom in block letters, "Not every truth should be unearthed." The sheet of paper contained a typed message. "Eleanor protected you by burying the past. The account was blood money, payment for silence. Take it and disappear, or history will repeat itself." Nora sank to the floor, her back against the front door, the photograph clutched in her trembling hand. Someone knew exactly what she had discovered today. Someone had been watching her, following her movements, anticipating her questions. But who? The only people who knew about the account were the bank manager and whoever had sent the threatening texts. Could they be the same person? Or was there someone else involved, someone with a vested interest in keeping Eleanor's secrets buried? As if in answer to her unspoken question, Nora's phone buzzed with a news alert. She had set up notifications for anything related to Ethan or Olivia, a form of self-torture she hadn't been able to relinquish. The headline made her blood run cold. Prominent attorney Olivia Barnes appointed to handle historic Whitman Estate Trust. The article explained that Olivia had been named special counsel to the Whitman Foundation, a philanthropic organization established in the 1970s by industrialist Harold Whitman. The foundation controlled millions in assets, primarily devoted to veterans' causes and historic preservation. Harold Whitman, the name that Sister Agnes had mentioned, the man in the military uniform, the possible key to Margaret's disappearance. And now Olivia, the woman who had helped Ethan steal Nora's inheritance, was working for a foundation bearing his name. This couldn't be coincidence. Somehow, Ethan and Olivia were connected to the dark secret in Eleanor's past. They hadn't stolen the money by chance. They had targeted Nora specifically, perhaps because of who she was, what she represented, or what she might discover. Nora stared at the photograph again, at the twins captured in a moment of innocence, unaware of the shadow looming behind them. Then she looked at the silver locket with the baby's images. Eleanor and Margaret, before secrets and lies had torn them apart. "What happened to you, Margaret?" she whispered to the empty room. "And what did Eleanor do afterward?" The answers, Nora suspected, were worth far more than $4.2 million. They were worth someone's freedom, perhaps even someone's life. And now those answers had become worth everything to Nora, too. Olivia Barnes sat at her glass-topped desk in the downtown Chicago law office of Harrington Price and Associates, her manicured fingers tapping an irritated rhythm against her silver laptop. The corner office afforded her a panoramic view of the city skyline, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows between gleaming skyscrapers. It was the kind of view that reminded ambitious people they were winning at life, exactly the validation Olivia craved. But today, the view offered no comfort. Her inbox had just delivered the one message she had been dreading for months. "Ms. Barnes," the email began coldly. "First Chicago Bank has received an inquiry regarding account number 0148392, originally opened by Eleanor Whitman in 1972. As the representing attorney in the recent Whitman estate matter, we require clarification on several discrepancies that have emerged concerning the transfer of assets previously adjudicated. Please contact our legal department at your earliest convenience." The porcelain coffee cup in Olivia's hand trembled slightly, sending ripples across the surface of the dark liquid. She set it down carefully, leaving a perfect red lipstick print on the rim. "Damn it," she whispered, her polished facade cracking momentarily. She found it. Nora Whitman wasn't supposed to discover the account. That had been the linchpin of their entire plan, Eleanor's secret insurance policy, hidden where no one would think to look. Until now. Olivia's gaze drifted to the framed photograph on her desk, herself and Ethan on a yacht in the Cayman Islands, champagne flutes raised in a toast to their future. They looked perfect together, she with her blonde hair gleaming in the tropical sunshine, he with his lazy, confident smile. The golden couple. But beneath that glossy surface lay a web of deceit so complex that sometimes even Olivia lost track of which lies they had told to whom. Her intercom buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. "Ms. Barnes, Mr. Carlton is online too. He says it's urgent." Olivia took a deep breath, composing herself. "Put him through, Jenna." Ethan's voice filled her office, pitched low and urgent. "Have you seen the email from the bank?" "I'm looking at it right now," Olivia replied, keeping her voice even despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. "She's found the account, Ethan. Somehow she knows." "That's impossible," he hissed. "Eleanor swore that information died with her. That was the whole point of—" He stopped abruptly, aware that even on a private line, some words were too dangerous to speak. Well, apparently Eleanor had a backup plan. Olivia's mind raced through contingencies. "We need to meet, not at my place, not at yours. Somewhere public but private. The Palmer House Bar, 7 o'clock. Ethan's voice had regained its usual confidence. "Don't worry, Liv, this is just a hiccup. We've come too far to let Nora ruin everything now." Olivia ended the call and turned back to her computer, closing the incriminating email with a decisive click. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, perfectly styled hair, impeccable makeup, designer suit, the image of success and control. But beneath that flawless exterior, a clock was ticking. And Olivia knew better than most how quickly time could run out. The Palmer House Hilton had been a Chicago landmark for generations, its lobby a gilded masterpiece of Beaux-Arts splendor. The bar, tucked into one corner, offered intimate tables shrouded in just enough shadow for private conversations to remain private. Ethan was already on his second whiskey when Olivia arrived, precisely at 7. His Brooks Brothers suit was slightly rumpled, his normally perfect hair showing signs of agitated fingers running through it repeatedly. "You're late," he murmured, as she slid into the booth opposite him. "I'm exactly on time," Olivia corrected, signaling to the waiter for a gin martini. "And I've been doing damage control all afternoon." Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "What did you tell the bank?" "That I'd review the matter and get back to them." She accepted her martini with a practiced smile for the waiter, waiting until he was out of earshot before continuing. "But that won't hold them for long. If Nora has accessed the account information, she's already connecting the dots." "What could she possibly know?" Ethan scoffed, but the bravado in his voice was undermined by the nervous tapping of his fingers against the table. "The money was legally transferred. We made sure of that." Olivia fixed him with a cold stare. "Don't be naive. It's not about the legality. It's about what the money represents. If she traces it back to Harold Whitman—" "She won't," Ethan interrupted. "Those records were sealed decades ago. The only people who knew the truth were Eleanor and Harold's associates," Olivia finished, "one of whom happens to be my father's oldest client." She took a slow sip of her martini, the juniper bitterness matching her mood. "Dad called me this afternoon. He heard through the grapevine that someone's been asking questions about the Whitman Foundation, about Harold specifically." The color drained from Ethan's face. "Nora? Who else? She's piecing it together, Ethan. The twins, the disappearance, Harold's involvement, all of it." "This has gone too far," Ethan muttered, knocking back the remainder of his whiskey. "We were supposed to get the money and disappear. That was the plan. Clean, simple." Olivia laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. "Nothing about this was ever clean or simple. You know that better than anyone." She leaned closer. "You're the one who brought me into this. You're the one who told me about Eleanor's secret, about what she and Harold did. I didn't know she would hide the account information in her goddamn ashes." Ethan's voice rose, drawing momentary glances from nearby patrons. He lowered it again, hands shaking slightly. "This was supposed to be justice, Olivia. For my grandmother." "For Margaret," Olivia corrected softly. "You can say her name. That's what this has always been about." Ethan's face contorted with an emotion too complex for simple description, grief mixed with rage, loyalty tangled with betrayal. "My grandmother was murdered by her own sister and that monster she married. They took everything from her, from my mother, from me." "I know," Olivia soothed, reaching across the table to take his hand. "And we've made them pay. The money is ours now, rightfully ours. But if Nora keeps digging—" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There are people who still have a vested interest in keeping the past buried, people who might view Nora's investigation as a threat." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. "You don't think—" "The Whitman Foundation controls over $50 million in assets," Olivia interrupted, "built on Harold's military contracts and Eleanor's silence. That kind of money creates powerful custodians who wouldn't appreciate old scandals being resurrected. So what do we do?" Ethan's voice had regained some of its strength, his lawyer's mind already calculating moves and countermoves. Olivia smiled, a cold curve of red lips that didn't reach her eyes. "We get ahead of the narrative. I've been appointed special counsel to the Whitman Foundation, a position that gives me access to everything Nora might be looking for. And we destroy it," Ethan concluded. "No," Olivia shook her head. "We control it. Information is only dangerous when it's in the wrong hands. In the right hands, our hands, it becomes leverage." A notification chimed on Olivia's phone. She glanced down, her composed expression faltering momentarily. "What is it?" Ethan demanded. "A text from my contact at the bank. Nora's requested copies of all documents related to the account opening, including the original signature cards." "Can they trace the signature to Harold?" Ethan's voice tightened with renewed anxiety. "Possibly. But that's not what worries me." Olivia's gaze was distant, calculating. "What worries me is what else was in that account. Eleanor didn't just hide money there, Ethan. She hid evidence." "Evidence of what?" But the question was perfunctory. Ethan already knew the answer. "Of what really happened to Margaret." Olivia finished her martini in a single swallow. "And if Nora finds that evidence, everything we've done will be for nothing." As they left the Palmer house, neither noticed the young woman sitting in the lobby, partially hidden behind a newspaper. Only when they had disappeared through the revolving doors did Nora Whitman lower the paper, her face pale but determined. She had followed Olivia from her law office, a desperate gamble that had paid off beyond expectation. She hadn't been able to hear their conversation, but the agitation in their body language told her everything she needed to know. They were scared. And people who were scared made mistakes. Back in her rented house, Nora added new elements to her investigation wall, a printout of Olivia's professional biography with her connection to the Whitman Foundation highlighted, a newspaper clipping about Ethan's mother, Rebecca Carlton, who had died under mysterious circumstances in 1992. And at the center, the photograph of the twins with the shadowy figure in the background. Something Olivia had said to Ethan in the hotel lobby as they were leaving had caught Nora's attention. Just a fragment, but enough. The military records might still exist. Military records. Harold Whitman's service history. Another thread to pull. Nora's phone buzzed with an email alert. The bank had processed her request for the account documents. They would be available for pickup tomorrow morning. As she prepared for bed, Nora caught a glimpse of movement outside her kitchen window. A shadow that seemed to pause, then move on. Her pulse quickened. Was someone watching the house? Or was her imagination, fueled by days of discoveries and revelations, beginning to betray her? Either way, she knew she couldn't stop now. Eleanor had hidden the account number in her ashes for a reason. She had wanted Nora to find it, wanted her to uncover the truth, whatever the cost. As she drifted toward uneasy sleep, Nora's last conscious thought was of the twins in the photograph, their identical faces frozen in a moment of innocence before darkness descended. One sister had vanished without a trace, the other had married a monster. And somewhere in between lay a truth worth killing for. The Veterans Archives occupied the basement level of the Cook County Administration Building, a fluorescent-lit labyrinth of metal shelving and cardboard boxes that smelled of dust and forgotten promises. Nora had spent 3 hours navigating the bureaucratic maze required to gain access to military service records from the 1940s, presenting herself as a historian researching Illinois veterans of World War II. Now hunched over a scratched metal desk beneath flickering lights, she carefully turned the brittle pages of Harold Whitman's service file. Most of the information was mundane: enlistment forms, training records, deployment dates. Harold had served in Army intelligence during the final years of the war, stationed primarily in France and later Germany. He had received 2 commendations for actions of exceptional value to Allied operations, the details of which were conspicuously absent from the file. What caught Nora's attention was a notation in his discharge papers. Subject transferred to Operation Paperclip Oversight, effective January 1946. The rest of the page had been heavily redacted, black lines obscuring whatever had followed. Operation Paperclip. Nora vaguely remembered it from a college history course. Something about German scientists brought to America after the war. What would Harold Whitman, an intelligence officer, have to do with that? She photographed each page meticulously with her phone, paying special attention to the signatures. Harold's handwriting was distinctive, aggressive downstrokes, letters that crowded together as if competing for space. It matched exactly the signature on Eleanor's bank account documents, confirming what Nora had already suspected. Harold, not Eleanor, had established the mysterious account. As she was returning the file to its protective sleeve, a small newspaper clipping fell from between the pages. It was from the Chicago Tribune, dated July 1972, exactly when the bank account had been opened. The headline read, "Local philanthropist establishes Veterans Foundation." The accompanying photograph showed Harold Whitman, by then a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, shaking hands with the mayor. Behind them stood a woman Nora recognized instantly, Eleanor, her face an expressionless mask, her eyes somehow both present and absent. The article described the Whitman Foundation as dedicated to supporting veterans and preserving military heritage, with an initial endowment of $3.75 million. Nearly the exact amount that had been stolen from Nora's inheritance, adjusted for inflation. She was photographing the clipping when a voice spoke directly behind her. Fascinating reading, isn't it? Nora startled, nearly dropping her phone. She turned to find an elderly man in a tweed jacket watching her with keen blue eyes. A visitor badge, similar to hers, was clipped to his lapel. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said, his voice softened by what might have been a New England accent. "I couldn't help noticing you're researching Harold Whitman, an interesting character." Nora hesitated, unsure whether to engage or make a hasty exit. The man seemed harmless enough, late 70s at least, with a scholarly air and arthritic hands that trembled slightly. "Did you know him?" she asked cautiously. The man's smile was tinged with something like regret. "I knew of him. I was with the Judge Advocate General's office in the 1970s. Whitman's name crossed my desk more than once." He extended a gnarled hand. "Walter Grisham retired, and you are—" "Jane," Nora lied smoothly. "Jane Roberts. I'm researching a book on post-war military contracts." Grisham's eyes twinkled knowingly. A rich topic, particularly where Whitman was concerned. He glanced at the file on the desk. "Though you won't find the real story in those sanitized records." Something in his tone made Nora's pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" Grisham lowered himself carefully into the chair opposite her, wincing slightly as he adjusted his position. Harold Whitman made his fortune in the chaos of post-war Europe. Military intelligence officers had opportunities, shall we say, access to information, to people, to assets that had been, shall we say, misplaced during the conflict. "You're saying he stole Nazi treasures?" Nora kept her voice neutral, though her heart was racing. Grisham chuckled dryly. "Nothing so melodramatic, but he did return with connections that proved extraordinarily lucrative. By the 1950s, Whitman Industries was one of the largest defense contractors in the Midwest. Very respected, very well connected." His expression grew more serious. "But there were rumors, investigations that were started then abruptly closed, questions that were never quite answered about certain overseas transactions." "What kind of transactions?" Nora leaned forward, her pretense of academic interest giving way to genuine urgency. Grisham seemed to consider his words carefully before responding. "The kind that involve large sums of money being paid to ensure certain secrets remain buried." He nodded toward the newspaper clipping. "That foundation was established 1 week after a federal grand jury investigation into Whitman Industries was mysteriously dropped. The timing always struck me as significant." The pieces were starting to connect in Nora's mind. The bank account opened in 1972. The foundation established the same year, the exact amount matching her stolen inheritance. "Mr. Grisham," she said slowly, "have you ever heard of a woman named Margaret Whitman? Eleanor Whitman's twin sister?" The old lawyer's expression changed subtly, a shadow passing over his features. "Why do you ask?" "I believe she disappeared in 1957, shortly before Eleanor married Harold." Grisham was silent for a long moment, his rheumy eyes studying Nora with new intensity. "You're not writing a book, are you?" It wasn't a question. "You're Nora Whitman, Eleanor's granddaughter." The blood drained from Nora's face. "How did you—" "I've been following the court case," he said, waving away her surprise with an arthritis-twisted hand. "The missing inheritance, the ex-husband and his attorney girlfriend. Quite the scandal in legal circles." He leaned closer. "And now here you are asking about Margaret. That's not coincidence." Nora considered lying, then abandoned the idea. Grisham might be the one person who could help her understand what she was uncovering. "No, it's not coincidence. I found information about a bank account Eleanor had hidden. It led me to Margaret and to Harold. I'm trying to understand what happened." Grisham's gaze drifted to the window, where late afternoon light slanted across the city skyline. "Some questions are dangerous to answer, Ms. Whitman. Some truths are protected by people who have much to lose if they come to light." "I've already received threats," Nora admitted, "but I can't stop now. Not until I understand what happened to my family. What happened to Margaret." The old lawyer nodded slowly as if making a decision. "I retired from legal practice decades ago, but I've kept certain insurance policies, documents that seemed worth preserving." He reached into his jacket pocket and extracted a business card, yellowed with age. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. There's something you should see." As Grisham stood to leave, Nora asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Did you know? About Margaret?" He paused, his expression unreadable. "Not then. But later, when the rumors started about Eleanor's foundation, about what it was really funding, I began to wonder. The twins' story always seemed unfinished." After Grisham departed, Nora remained in the archives for another hour, meticulously documenting everything she could find about Harold Whitman and the foundation that bore his name. A clearer picture was emerging, though the edges remained shrouded in shadow. Harold had returned from the war with connections that made him wealthy. By the 1950s, his company was thriving. Then Margaret disappeared, and Harold married her identical twin. 2 decades later, with federal investigators closing in, Harold established a foundation and opened a secret bank account with a significant sum. It wasn't a complete picture, but it was enough to make Nora's skin crawl with apprehension. The following morning, Nora sat in a cramped office above a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown, the walls lined with sagging bookshelves and filing cabinets that looked as ancient as their owner. Grisham had retired from his prestigious law firm years ago, but maintained this small private practice for what he called matters of personal interest. "I didn't show you this yesterday because I wanted to verify your identity first," Grisham explained, unlocking a battered filing cabinet with a key he wore around his neck. "Too many eyes in government buildings, too many ears." He withdrew a thin folder labeled simply EW 1975 and placed it carefully on the desk between them. "In 1975, I was approached by Eleanor Whitman. She wanted to create a specialized trust, one that would remain dormant until certain conditions were met. It was unusual enough that I kept copies of the drafts, even after she ultimately took her business elsewhere." Nora opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a document titled Last Will and Testament, dated March 1975. It was not the same will that had been filed after Eleanor's death. The one that had left everything to Nora, the one that Ethan and Olivia had somehow manipulated to steal her inheritance. This was an entirely different document, and what it contained made Nora's blood run cold. "I, Eleanor May Whitman, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of the sum held in account Devereaux 1483972 at First Chicago Bank to Margaret's daughter, should she ever be located. This sum represents payment for irreparable harm done and a debt that can never truly be repaid." Nora read the passage 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Margaret's daughter? But Margaret disappeared when she was 17. Sister Agnes said they never found... Her voice trailed off as the implications crashed over her. If Margaret had a daughter, she must have been alive after her supposed disappearance. But why would Eleanor need to locate her niece? And what irreparable harm was she attempting to compensate for? "I don't understand," Nora said, looking up at Grisham in confusion. "I'm Eleanor's granddaughter. My father was Henry Whitman, Eleanor and Harold's son." Grisham's expression was grave. "Are you certain of that?" The question hit Nora like a physical blow. "Of course I'm certain. I have birth certificates, photographs, memories." But even as she spoke, doubt began to creep into her mind. Eleanor had hidden so much, lied about so many fundamental truths. What if the most basic facts of Nora's identity were also fabrications? "There's more," Grisham said gently, turning to the next page of the document. "Eleanor never signed this will. She called me the day after our final draft meeting and said she had changed her mind, that the past should remain buried. But she left this with me." He withdrew an envelope from the back of the folder. Unlike the legal documents, this was personal stationery. The same cream-colored paper with a rose embossment that Eleanor had used for the letter in the bank. On the front, in Eleanor's elegant script, was written, "For Margaret's daughter when the time comes." Nora's hands shook so violently she could barely open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few handwritten lines. "The foundation was created to repair what our family destroyed. The account is merely the shell that holds the evidence of Harold's crimes. When you understand the truth, you will know what must be done, but be careful. There are those who would kill to keep these secrets buried, as they have killed before." The letter was signed simply Eleanor. Nora felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. "Mr." Grisham, she said, her voice barely audible. Are you suggesting that I'm not Eleanor's granddaughter? That I'm Margaret's daughter? The elderly lawyer spread his hands in a gesture of uncertainty. I don't have that answer, Ms. Whitman. I only know what Eleanor prepared and what she ultimately chose not to execute. The question is, why did she change her mind? And why has someone gone to such lengths to prevent you from discovering this account? Before Nora could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. The number was blocked, the message chillingly direct. You've gone too far. Final warning. As she stared at the screen, a second text arrived. This one from the bank manager, Reeves. Ms. Whitman, please call immediately. There's been an unauthorized attempt to access your grandmother's account information. The walls of the small office seemed to close in around Nora as the full weight of what she was uncovering settled over her. This wasn't just about stolen money anymore. This was about identities erased, lives taken, truths buried so deep that decades later they still had the power to destroy, and someone was willing to kill to keep it that way. Rain pounded against the windows of Nora's rental house, the violent spring storm matching her turbulent emotions. She sat motionless at her kitchen table, surrounded by the fragments of her shattered identity, birth certificate, childhood photographs, Eleanor's letters, and the devastating revelation from Grisham's office. Thunder cracked overhead as Nora stared at the birth certificate that now seemed like nothing more than an elaborate prop in a lifelong deception. Eleanor May Whitman, listed as her grandmother. Henry James Whitman, her father. Dates, official seals, signatures, all the hallmarks of legitimacy, all potentially lies. The possibility that had been gradually taking shape in her mind now crystallized into a horrifying clarity. Eleanor wasn't her grandmother at all. Eleanor was her aunt. And Margaret, the vanished twin whose existence had been systematically erased from family history, was her true mother. But if that were true, who was her father? And what had really happened to Margaret after her supposed disappearance? Nora's phone rang, startling her from her dark reverie. It was Reeves, the bank manager. Miss Whitman, I've been trying to reach you, he said, his voice tight with concern. There's been a development regarding your grandmother's account. What kind of development? Nora asked, instantly alert. Someone attempted to access the account records using falsified authorization. They claim to be acting on behalf of the Whitman Foundation with power of attorney. Olivia, it had to be. Were they successful? No, Reeves assured her. Our security protocols prevented the access, but there's something else you should know. He hesitated. The account doesn't just contain money, Ms. Whitman. There's also a safety deposit box linked to it, Box 1717. Eleanor left explicit instructions that it could only be accessed by, and I'm quoting directly here, Margaret's daughter when she comes looking. The words hit Nora like a physical blow, confirming what she had begun to suspect. Eleanor had known the truth would eventually surface. She had prepared for this moment, leaving breadcrumbs that only Nora would be able to follow. Mr. Reeves, I need to access that box immediately. I anticipated that, he replied. I've made arrangements for a private viewing room tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Given the sensitive nature of the situation, I thought discretion would be advisable. After ending the call, Nora moved methodically through the house, gathering the documents that now represented her only link to the truth. The silver locket with the twins' baby pictures, the photograph of Eleanor and Margaret with the shadowy figure in the background, the letters and bank statements. Everything went into a fireproof document case that she would take with her to the bank. As she packed, a new text message arrived, not from the anonymous threatener this time, but from Ethan. Her pulse quickened as she read it. We need to talk. Alone. About Margaret. About what really happened. Nora's finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity and a desperate need for answers overrode her caution. She replied simply, "When and where?" His response came immediately. Millennium Park. Bean sculpture. 7 p.m. tonight. Come alone. The rational part of Nora's mind screamed that this was a trap. Ethan had helped steal her inheritance. He was sleeping with the woman who had engineered the legal theft. He couldn't be trusted. But if anyone knew the truth about Margaret, about who Nora really was, it would be Ethan. His mother, Rebecca, must have known something, and now Nora needed to know too, even if it meant walking into danger. She texted a carefully worded message to Grisham, telling him where she was going and why. If anything happened to her, at least someone would know where to start looking. Millennium Park was relatively empty due to the persistent rain. The iconic Cloudgate sculpture, affectionately known as the Bean, reflecting the grey sky and sparse visitors in its mirror-like surface. Nora arrived 15 minutes early, positioning herself where she could observe all approaches. Her hair was tucked under a baseball cap, her face partially obscured by large sunglasses, despite the gloomy weather. The document case was securely strapped across her body, hidden beneath her raincoat. At exactly 7 p.m., Ethan appeared, walking briskly from the direction of Michigan Avenue. He was alone, his tall figure instantly recognizable even at a distance. He wore jeans and a dark windbreaker, a far cry from his usual tailored suits. His eyes darted nervously around the park as he approached the sculpture. Nora waited until he was directly beneath the bean, his distorted reflection multiplying across the curved metal surface before she approached. His face registered shock when he saw her, followed quickly by something that looked almost like relief. "Nora," he began, but she cut him off. "Don't say anything you don't mean," she said coldly. "Why did you want to meet?" Ethan glanced around again, clearly anxious. "Not here, we need somewhere private." "This is as private as it gets," Nora insisted. "Say what you came to say." Rain slicked down Ethan's face, plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He looked haggard, the confident lawyer persona stripped away by what appeared to be genuine fear. "You're in danger," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Olivia found out about your meeting with Grisham. She knows about the safety deposit box. There are people, powerful people connected to the Foundation, who will do anything to keep those contents buried." "People like you?" Nora couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "You stole my inheritance, Ethan. You betrayed me in every possible way." "It wasn't like that," he insisted. "The money was never yours to begin with, Nora. It was blood money, payment for what they did to my grandmother, to Margaret." The name hung in the air between them, charged with decades of secrets and lies. "What are you talking about?" Nora demanded. "What do you know about Margaret?" Ethan stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Margaret was my grandmother, my mother's mother. She didn't disappear in 1957. She escaped. From Eleanor, from Harold, from all of it." The world seemed to tilt beneath Nora's feet. "That's impossible. If Margaret was your grandmother, then she couldn't be your mother," Ethan finished. "I know. That's what I thought too, until Olivia found the sealed records from St. Catherine's. There were 3 babies, Nora, identical triplets, not twins." Thunder rolled overhead, nature providing a dramatic backdrop to the seismic revelation. Triplets, not twins. The foundation of Nora's understanding cracked further, fragments of her identity scattering like glass from a shattered mirror. Eleanor and Margaret had another sister. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, as if someone else was speaking. "Agnes," Ethan nodded. "The 3rd sister, the one who truly disappeared. The records indicated she died of pneumonia when they were 5, but that was a lie. She was separated from Eleanor and Margaret, adopted by a wealthy family from New York. They never knew she existed." "How do you know all this?" Nora whispered, struggling to process the implications. "Because my mother spent her life searching for the truth after Margaret died. She found hospital records, adoption papers. Then she made the mistake of confronting Eleanor about it in 1992. His expression darkened. "A week later, my mother was dead. Car accident, they said. Brake lines cut, I say." The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. "And you think I'm—" "Agnes's daughter," Ethan confirmed. "Eleanor's other niece. The one she stole as an infant and raised as her granddaughter, to replace the family she had destroyed." Nora's legs threatened to give way beneath her. She reached out to steady herself against the bean's smooth surface, her reflection fragmented and distorted across its curve. a fitting metaphor for how she felt. Nothing was as it seemed. No one was who they claimed to be. Why? She managed to ask. Why would Eleanor do that? Guilt, Ethan said simply. And fear. Harold Whitman was involved in something terrible during the war. Operation Paperclip was just the beginning. He made deals with people who should have been prosecuted as war criminals, made millions from their research, their knowledge. Margaret discovered the truth in 1957 and threatened to expose him. So they killed her. Nora's voice broke on the question. Ethan shook his head. Not immediately. They kept her prisoner for months. By the time she escaped, she was pregnant. She gave birth to my mother in hiding, then spent the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. When Agnes died in childbirth in 1980, Eleanor saw an opportunity. She took the baby, you, and created a new identity. Henry Whitman never existed, Nora. He was a fabrication to explain your presence in Eleanor's life. The rain fell harder now, but Nora barely noticed. Every certainty in her life had been stripped away, leaving nothing but questions and a bottomless sense of betrayal. Why are you telling me this now after everything you've done? Ethan's expression was a complex mixture of regret and determination. Because Olivia has gone too far. This was supposed to be about justice, taking back what was owed to Margaret's family, but now there are people involved who want to bury the evidence permanently, people who are willing to kill to protect the Whitman Foundation's reputation. People like who? I don't know exactly. But they're connected to whatever Harold was involved with during and after the war. The foundation wasn't created for philanthropy, Nora. It was created to continue his work that would destroy lives if it became public. A movement at the edge of the park caught Nora's attention. A figure in a dark coat, moving purposefully toward them. Someone's coming, she warned, instinctively stepping back. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, his face draining of color. It's too late, he whispered. They found us. Without warning, he grabbed Nora's arm and pulled her toward the opposite side of the sculpture. Run, he hissed. Get to the bank tomorrow. The safety deposit box has evidence of everything. What Harold did, what Eleanor knew, who you really are. Olivia doesn't know the full truth yet, but when she finds out what? That you're not just Agnes's daughter. You're Harold Whitman's daughter, too. The revelation struck Nora with such force that she froze mid-step. What are you saying? Agnes was pregnant when she died, Nora, with Harold's child. That's what Eleanor was hiding all these years. That's why she took you, raised you, protected you. Because you were evidence of the final betrayal. Harold's relationship with the sister no one knew existed. Before Nora could process this horrifying revelation, a sharp crack echoed across the park. Ethan's body jerked violently, his eyes widening in shock. A dark stain blossomed across his windbreaker as he crumpled to the wet pavement. Ethan! Nora screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Blood pulsed between her fingers as she pressed desperately against the wound in his chest. His lips moved, forming words she could barely hear over the rain and her own panicked breathing. Safe deposit box. Truth. Run. Then his eyes glazed over, fixed on the storm-dark sky but seeing nothing. Nora looked up to see the dark-coated figure approaching steadily, one hand concealed within their jacket. Without conscious thought, she scrambled to her feet and ran, clutching the document case to her chest, leaving Ethan's body sprawled beneath the distorted reflections of the bean. Behind her, sirens began to wail in the distance, too late for Ethan, perhaps too late for the truth he had died trying to reveal. Morning sunlight streamed through the bulletproof glass of First Chicago Bank's private viewing room, casting a golden rectangle across the polished oak table where Nora sat with trembling hands. Before her lay Safety Deposit Box 1717, its brushed steel surface innocuous despite the devastating secrets it might contain. Mr. Reeves stood discreetly by the door, his earlier professional demeanor now tinged with genuine concern. Take all the time you need, Ms. Whitman, he said softly. I'll be outside when you're finished. As the door closed behind him, Nora stared at the box, momentarily paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. 12 hours had passed since she'd watched Ethan die, his blood seeping into the rain-soaked pavement of Millennium Park. 12 hours of hiding, running, and fighting waves of hysteria that threatened to drown her. She had spent the night in a cheap motel paid for with cash, her face plastered across late-night news broadcasts as a person of interest in Ethan Carlton's murder. The security footage from the Bean had been too rain-blurred to clearly identify the shooter, but it had captured Nora fleeing the scene. Now she was a fugitive, running not just from the law, but from whoever had silenced Ethan to keep the Whitman family's secrets buried. With a deep breath, Nora opened the safety deposit box. Inside lay a stack of carefully preserved documents, a small leather journal and a manila envelope. She began with the envelope, which contained what appeared to be original birth certificates, 3 of them, dated June 12, 1940. Eleanor May Whitman, Margaret Rose Whitman, Agnes Elizabeth Whitman, triplets, not twins. Ethan had been telling the truth. The birth certificates were attached to a hospital record, noting that Agnes had been separated from her sisters at 3 days old, transferred to a different medical facility due to respiratory complications. But a handwritten note in the margin told a different story. Adoption arranged through Dr. Harmon. Family paid $10,000. Nora's throat constricted as she realized the full extent of the deception. The triplets had been deliberately separated. Agnes sold to a wealthy family, while Eleanor and Margaret remained at St. Catherine's orphanage. They had never known their sister existed. Next, she examined a stack of military documents bearing Harold Whitman's name, reports and transcripts that painted a chilling picture of his post-war activities. He hadn't simply been an intelligence officer. He had been responsible for recruiting German scientists with dark pasts, men whose research had been funded by human suffering in concentration camps. Harold had helped these men escape justice, bringing them to America to continue their work under the umbrella of Operation Paperclip. But Harold had done more than just recruit these scientists. According to internal memos, he had privately funded their continued research through shell companies and offshore accounts. Research that even the US government had deemed too ethically questionable to pursue. Nora felt physically ill as she read the clinical descriptions of experiments on volunteer subjects with pre-existing mental deficiencies. Eugenics, genetic manipulation, selective breeding. The language was sanitized, but the horror was clear. A handwritten letter from 1957 provided the missing link. It was from Margaret to Eleanor, dated 2 days before her supposed disappearance. "I found his files, Ellie. I know what Harold's been doing with those German doctors. The experiments, the babies, all of it. He's creating monsters in the name of genetic improvement. I'm going to the FBI tomorrow. I'm sorry. I know you love him, but this has to stop." Margaret had discovered Harold's secrets. She had threatened to expose him. And then she had disappeared. With shaking hands, Nora opened the leather journal, recognizing Eleanor's elegant script immediately. The entries began in 1957, shortly after Margaret's disappearance, and continued sporadically through 1980. The early entries were filled with anguish and self-loathing. "I knew what he was capable of, yet I did nothing. I chose him over her. I will carry that shame to my grave." And later, "M is alive. H doesn't know. She escaped the facility last month. Pregnant, desperate. I gave her money, papers, told her to run as far as she could. H would kill her if he knew." The entries grew more sporadic through the 1960s and 70s, documenting Eleanor's growing awareness of Harold's continued experiments and her own complicity through silence. Then in 1978, a jarring revelation: "Agnes is alive. After all these years, I found our sister, the baby they took away before we were old enough to remember. She looks just like us, the same eyes, the same smile. It's like seeing a ghost, but I can't tell her the truth, can't risk H finding out. He would see it as an opportunity, not a miracle." Nora's hand flew to her mouth as she read the entry dated April 3rd, 1980. "Agnes is dead. Complications in childbirth," they said. "But the baby survived, a girl. H doesn't know about the child, and he never will. I've made arrangements. As far as the world is concerned, she will be my granddaughter, my atonement. The one life I can save after failing to save so many." The truth crashed over Nora like a physical force. Eleanor hadn't been her grandmother. She hadn't even been her aunt. Eleanor had been her mother's identical sister, a great aunt who had assumed guardianship after Agnes died in childbirth. But the most devastating revelation came in the final pages of the journal. The DNA tests confirm it. The baby is Harold's. Somehow he found Agnes, recognized her. Did he know she was our sister? Or was he simply drawn to her because she looked like us? Either way, the pattern continues. The bloodlines he's been so obsessed with manipulating have now twisted back on themselves. The child is the culmination of his work and his greatest crime. Nora was Harold Whitman's daughter, and Agnes, her true mother, had been his wife's identical sister. The family tree had collapsed in on itself, creating exactly the kind of genetic outcome Harold's twisted research had been pursuing. The final entry in the journal, dated just 6 months before Eleanor's death, offered the closest thing to an explanation and an apology. I have lived a life of cowardice, of silence when I should have spoken, of compliance when I should have rebelled. I helped create a monster by looking away from the truth. But Nora is innocent. She deserves to know who she is, where she came from, and she deserves the money, not as an inheritance but as compensation for what our family has done to her, to all of them. I've arranged for her to find the account after I'm gone. May she use it to break the cycle I was too weak to end. Tears streamed down Nora's face as she closed the journal. Everything she had believed about herself, her family, her very identity, had been built on lies. She was the product of generations of secrets, betrayals, and moral compromises. The final item in the safety deposit box was a USB drive labeled simply "Proof." Nora slipped it into her pocket, gathered the documents, and took a moment to compose herself before signaling to Reeves that she was finished. As she left the bank, stepping into the bright Chicago morning, Nora felt strangely calm despite the chaos surrounding her. The truth, horrible as it was, had finally set her free. She knew who she was. She knew what had been done to her family, and she knew what she had to do next. 6 months later, Nora sat in a federal courthouse as the judge delivered the verdict in a case that had captivated the nation. Olivia Barnes and 3 board members of the Whitman Foundation had been found guilty of conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. The evidence from Eleanor's safety deposit box, combined with the digital files on the USB drive, had exposed decades of criminal activity hiding behind the Foundation's philanthropic facade. Harold's experimental program hadn't ended with his death in 1990. The Foundation had continued his work in secret, using its legitimate charitable activities as cover. The genetic research, the manipulation of bloodlines, the tracking of unwitting families across generations, it had all continued under the guidance of those who shared Harold's twisted vision. Ethan had died trying to expose the truth, his mother before him, and Margaret, the twin who had escaped, had spent her life in hiding, always looking over her shoulder until her death from cancer in 1985. The cycles of fear and silence had perpetuated themselves across 3 generations. But now, finally, it was over. As Olivia was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, her once perfect composure shattered. She caught Nora's eye. There was no remorse in her gaze, only cold fury at having been caught, at having lost. Outside, beneath a crisp autumn sky, reporters clamored for Nora's attention. "Ms. Whitman, how does it feel to have justice after all these years?" Nora paused, considering the question. "My name isn't Whitman," she said quietly. "It's Agnes Russell, my mother's name. And justice isn't what I feel. It's something closer to peace." Later that evening, Nora returned to Eleanor's house, now her house, though she intended to sell it as soon as possible. The money from Eleanor's secret account had been legally transferred to her name after Ethan's killers were identified and arrested. $4 million, blood money, as Ethan had called it, payment for silence that had cost too many lives. Nora had already established a foundation of her own, one dedicated to helping victims of genetic research abuses and supporting ethical oversight in scientific advancement. It felt like the only appropriate use for funds that had originated in such darkness. In the fading twilight, she carried Eleanor's ashes out to the garden where generations of Whitmans had played, lived, and perpetuated their secrets. The silver urn felt impossibly light in her hands. "I understand now," Nora whispered to the ashes as she opened the container. "You were trapped by your own choices, your own silence. You tried to make it right at the end, but some debts can't be paid with money." She scattered the ashes beneath an ancient oak tree, watching as the grey particles dispersed on the gentle breeze. With them went the anger she had carried since discovering the truth. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release of the bitterness that had threatened to consume her. As darkness fell, Nora looked up at the stars emerging in the velvet sky. She thought of Agnes, the mother she had never known, of Margaret, who had risked everything to expose the truth, of Eleanor, who had protected her in her own flawed way. 3 identical women, with 3 vastly different fates connected by blood and divided by choices. "It stops with me," Nora promised the night sky. "The secrets, the lies, the cycles of pain, it all stops with me." She placed a hand over her abdomen, where new life was just beginning to grow. A child who would know the truth of their origins, complicated and painful as they were. A child who would inherit not just genes and wealth, but honesty and the courage to face the past without being defined by it. For the first time since Eleanor's death, Nora felt something close to peace. The silence that had protected monsters for decades had finally been broken. The truth, with all its jagged edges and painful revelations, had finally seen daylight. And in that truth, however difficult, was the only path forward. Nora's journey reminds us that sometimes the most devastating truths are the ones buried closest to home. In a world where family secrets can span generations, what would you have done if you discovered your entire identity was built on carefully constructed lies? Would you have had the courage to keep digging when every revelation brought more pain, more danger, and more uncertainty? The ashes that Eleanor left behind contained more than just a bank account number. They held the key to liberation through truth, no matter how painful. Sometimes the inheritance we receive isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to break cycles of silence that have imprisoned our ancestors. Nora chose to scatter those ashes, and with them, the burden of secrets that had claimed too many lives. She chose to build something new from the ruins of deception, not just for herself, but for the future she carried within her. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what silences in your own life might be protecting something that needs to face the light? What truths are you entitled to know, even if others have decided you're better off without them? If this story touched you, please support our channel by subscribing, hitting that like button, and sharing with someone who appreciates stories that challenge us to look beyond the surface. Because like Nora discovered, sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single devastating question that changes everything.